The first glass shattered before anyone touched their dinner. It was Thanksgiving night, gold china, crystal wine glasses, and $1,000 Bordeaux breathing in the decanter. And at the head of the table, I stood holding a single folded paper that would burn everything to ash. "My name," I said, my voice steady even as my son's fiancée froze mid-laugh, "is Henry Caldwell. And before we carve this turkey, I think you all deserve to know what I've really been carving for the last 6 months, the truth about this family." The air went still. Forks paused midair. My son, Caleb, looked at me with confusion that bordered on fear. His fiancée's father, Richard Crane, a man whose handshake could crush glass, smirked from across the table like a king, humoring a jester. "You're out of line, Henry," he said. "This is neither the time nor the place." I turned the paper over a bank statement, one that bore his company's name and mine. "On the contrary," I said, "it's exactly the time. Because for months, while your daughter planned her perfect wedding, you've been trying to steal from my dead wife's trust, using my son as the unwitting key." The silence broke like glass gasps, a clatter of silverware, the rustle of linen. Caleb rose halfway from his chair, eyes wide. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I looked straight at him, my only son, the one thing I still believed in. "I'm talking about the people you're about to marry into, son. The ones who've been smiling in your face while using your signature to launder millions through offshore accounts." Richard's smirk cracked. "That's absurd." "Is it?" I interrupted, sliding the second paper across the table, a forged authorization form with Caleb's digital signature. "You're sloppy, Richard. The metadata doesn't lie." A tremor of panic passed across Isabella's face, his daughter, my son's fiancée. She tried to hide it behind a mask of confusion, but I saw the flicker, the guilt. I took a breath, scanning the table, the candles, the carved turkey cooling beside untouched plates, the faces twisted between disbelief and dread. "This isn't just a family dinner," I said softly. "It's a reckoning." And then, before anyone could speak, the memory cracked open, and we were back to where it all began. I'm glad you're here. Give this story a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far truth can travel, because the one I'm about to tell you tore through my family like a wildfire that refused to die. 6 months earlier, a quiet morning, a locked box, and the secret my late wife, Eleanor, had kept from me, a secret worth $95 million. 3 months after Eleanor's funeral, life had returned to a dull kind of rhythm, the kind that feels less like living and more like existing. The neighborhood kids still rode their bikes past my driveway. The church bell still rang every Sunday at 9, and my front porch light still buzzed with the same old stubborn moths. But inside, the house was too quiet. That was when my son, Caleb, called. "Dad," he said, his voice brisk but warm, "I'm coming down next weekend. Got someone I want you to meet." There was something in his tone I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, about to ask for the car keys, excitement mixed with nerves. When he pulled up that Saturday in his spotless silver Tesla, I knew immediately that time and success had built a distance between us that I hadn't noticed growing. He stepped out in a tailored coat that probably cost more than my old Chevy. His smile was still my boy's smile, but everything else about him screamed doctor, achiever, man of the city. And then she stepped out of the passenger side. "Dad, this is Isabella Crane," he said. She extended her hand before I could stand. The handshake was perfect, the kind you learn in rooms with chandeliers and polished speeches. "Mr. Caldwell," she said with practiced warmth, "it's a pleasure. I've heard so much about you." She was beautiful, no denying that, but beautiful in the kind of way that looked designed, curated. Her honey brown hair framed a face that had never known a cheap haircut. The scent of something expensive trailed her, subtle, cold, clean. We had lunch on the porch. I made fried chicken and mashed potatoes, Eleanor's recipe. Isabella ate politely, complimenting the food. But I noticed the way her eyes scanned everything, the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the photos on the mantel. It wasn't judgment exactly. It was calculation. "So," I asked, "how did you two meet?" "At the hospital gala," Isabella said. "Caleb saved one of my father's associates during an event last year. He collapsed, heart failure. Caleb performed CPR right there in front of everyone." She smiled at him like he was the trophy she'd just polished. Caleb blushed, rubbing his neck. "It wasn't that dramatic, Dad." Her father, Richard Crane, runs Crane Holdings, she continued. Real estate development, commercial assets, a few philanthropic ventures. That last part came out rehearsed like she'd said it 100 times in interviews. After lunch, as they were leaving, I overheard them talking by the car. "Babe," she said softly, "your father seems kind, but maybe for the engagement dinner, we should host it at my parents' house. There's more space, and my mom's particular about presentation." "Presentation?" Caleb asked. "You know what I mean," she said, brushing imaginary lint off his jacket. "We just want everything perfect. For both families." Caleb hesitated. "Sure, whatever you think's best." I stood at the kitchen window, unseen, the sound of the screen door clicking shut behind them. When I went back to the table, 2 untouched biscuits and a half-drunk glass of sweet tea sat where Isabella had been. On the napkin beneath her plate was a faint mark of pink lipstick, the expensive kind that didn't smudge but somehow left its trace anyway. That night, I sat with Eleanor's trust documents again, the light from the kitchen lamp spilling over the numbers. $92 million. Enough to change everything, and everyone, if I let it. And I realized that maybe this Caleb's engagement, Isabella's careful politeness, was exactly the test Eleanor had been preparing me for. A week later, I received an embossed invitation from the Cranes. "Mr. and Mrs. Richard Crane cordially invite you to an intimate engagement dinner celebrating the union of their daughter Isabella and Dr. Caleb Caldwell." The address was the Crane Estate, 900 Lenox Drive. I'd driven past it before a sprawling mansion surrounded by white iron gates and perfectly symmetrical gardens. The kind of house that made you straighten your posture when you looked at it. When I called Caleb to thank him for the invite, his voice sounded strained. "Dad, just be yourself, okay? They're different, but they mean well." "Son," I said quietly, "I've been myself for 62 years. I'm not about to start pretending now." He laughed nervously. "Right. Yeah, see you Friday." The following evening, I pressed Eleanor's old gold watch against my wrist, the one she'd given me for our 20th anniversary, and looked at myself in the mirror. A simple man in a clean suit, holding a secret worth more than everything the Cranes owned combined. As I drove toward Lenox Drive, I thought about Eleanor's note again. What you do after will matter more than what you find. And though I didn't know it then, what waited beyond those iron gates wasn't just an engagement dinner, it was the first course in a feast of deceit, pride, and revelation that would strip every illusion my family ever had about wealth and respect. The Crane estate sat on the edge of Buckhead like a monument to money, old money, or at least money that wanted you to believe it was old. Iron gates taller than my house, open to a driveway so long, I started to wonder if I'd missed a turn. Every 20 yards stood a marble statue, Greek gods frozen mid-stride, staring down anyone who didn't belong. When I finally reached the circular courtyard, I parked between a Porsche and a Bentley that looked newer than most marriages. A valet in white gloves appeared before I even opened my door. "Dr. Caldwell's father?" he asked smoothly, already reaching for my keys. "Henry's fine," I said. "You sure you can handle a Ford that's older than you?" He smiled politely, the way people do when they don't get the joke. Inside, the house smelled of lilies, money, and wax, the kind of polished wealth that never stopped performing. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with scenes of cherubs and clouds. Eleanor would have hated it. Too much glass, not enough soul. Caleb and Isabella were waiting in the foyer. My son looked sharp in his tailored jacket, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Isabella, meanwhile, was radiant, every strand of hair in place, her smile flawless. "Dad, you made it!" Caleb said, hugging me briefly before glancing nervously toward the grand staircase. "My parents are excited to meet you." Excited wasn't the word that came to mind when Richard Crane descended the stairs. He was tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who made sure you noticed his watch. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but shallow dominance disguised as courtesy. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, stretching my name into something that needed verifying. "Caleb's told us you're an engineer. Aircraft, wasn't it?" 38 years at Lockfield Aerospace, I replied. "Retired last spring." "Impressive," he said, though his eyes flicked toward my shoes before the word left his mouth. Then came Marianne Crane, all pearls and posture, her perfume a wall of gardenia, strong enough to erase the smell of anything human. "Henry, dear," she said, clasping both my hands, "we're thrilled to have you here. Caleb has been such a wonderful addition to our little circle." Her tone was syrupy, her smile weaponized. Dinner was served by a silent staff in matching black uniforms. Every course came with its own wine and its own speech from Richard about responsibility and legacy. I listened, nodded politely, and watched my son shrink inch by inch. At one point, Marianne turned to me. "You must be so proud," she said. "A man of such humble beginnings raising a doctor. It's quite the story of perseverance." "Humble beginnings?" I repeated, half smiling. "We called it working hard back then." "Oh, of course," she said, laughing lightly. "I didn't mean anything by it. We just come from very different backgrounds, don't we?" Different backgrounds. Translation: You don't belong here. Caleb reached for his wine, pretending not to hear. By dessert, I'd learned that the Cranes hosted fundraisers, sat on museum boards, and believed volunteering meant signing checks. Richard talked about philanthropic partnerships, but when I asked which organizations they funded, he waved the question off. "Mostly advisory roles," he said, which was code for we, like the photo ops. At the end of the meal, Richard raised his glass. "To family," he said, "and to blending old roots with new branches." Marianne's eyes drifted toward me. "Yes," she said, "may the branches learn to grow upward." Everyone laughed. Everyone except Caleb and me. After dinner, Richard pulled me aside in the study, a room lined with leather and arrogance. "You've raised a fine son," he said, pouring himself a drink. "But I hope you understand the pressures that come with our world. Appearances matter. Associations matter." "I thought love mattered," I said. He smiled, unbothered. "Of course, but love is complicated when money's involved." That was the first time I saw the faint crack in his composure, a tiny twitch when I mentioned money, noted. When I left, Caleb walked me out to the driveway. "Dad," he said quietly, "don't take anything they say personally. They're just old-fashioned." "Old-fashioned," I repeated. "That's one word for it." "They mean well," he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "Son," I said, stopping beside his car, "the day you start defending people for making you feel small, you've already given them permission to do it again." He didn't reply. Just hugged me awkwardly and said, "Drive safe." As I pulled away from the estate, the iron gates closing behind me, I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror, tired eyes, steady hands, and a secret worth more than everything that mansion contained. And somewhere deep down, a decision started to form, quiet, certain, and dangerous in its simplicity. If they wanted to measure worth by wealth, I'd let them. But on my terms. I didn't sleep much after that dinner. The night stuck to me, Marianne's careful insults, Richard's handshake that felt like a test, and Caleb's eyes darting between us like a man caught between two languages. I kept replaying it in my mind, wondering if Eleanor had known I'd face this. 2 days later, I went to see an old friend. Eddie Miller, my former co-worker from Lockfield Aerospace, still ran the parts supply division from his garage. We'd built fighter jets and fixed coffee machines with the same stubborn precision. He'd known Eleanor too. Everyone in that hangar had loved her. Eddie poured me coffee strong enough to peel paint. "You look like hell, Hank," he said. "You okay?" I told him about the dinner, the Cranes, the mansion, the way Caleb looked smaller in that room full of marble. Eddie whistled. "Son's marrying into money, huh? You ever notice how that changes people? Not overnight slow, like rust." "Rust?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, leaning back. "You don't see it right away, but it spreads. Money's the same way. Starts as polish, ends as corrosion." He was right. And that was when the idea took root. If Eleanor had hidden this fortune to test who I was, maybe I was supposed to use it to test who everyone else was. When I got home, I opened the trust files again. $92 million. Investments in renewable energy, private stocks, even a beachfront property under a shell company I'd never heard of, Bennett and Halloway Holdings. She'd built it quietly, methodically, like a blueprint for something I hadn't yet understood. I decided to keep everything secret. No mentions to Caleb, no grand announcements. People show their true selves when they think you're powerless, and I wanted truth more than comfort. The next few weeks were filled with wedding planning calls. Isabella's mother emailed me a list of potential rehearsal dinner venues, all of them starting at 10 grand per night. Caleb texted less and less. When he did call, it was to update me on logistics. "Dad, they're talking about having a live orchestra for the ceremony," he said once, as if reading from a script. It's, you know, just what they're used to. What about what you want? I asked. He paused. I want everyone to get along. That was my son, always the peacemaker, even when peace came at the cost of his backbone. A week before the engagement party, I got another call not from Caleb, but from Isabella herself. Mr. Caldwell, she said smoothly, I just wanted to make sure you received the dress code guidelines for the dinner. Guidelines? I asked, smiling despite myself. Nothing major, just formal attire, dark suit, no colored ties. My father likes things cohesive. Cohesive, I repeated, like wallpaper. She didn't laugh. Also, she continued, if you'd prefer, we can arrange for one of our drivers to bring you. Parking can be tricky at the venue. I've been driving since before your father could spell venue, I said. Of course, she replied lightly, but we want you to feel comfortable. It was all said politely, professionally, and yet every word was wrapped in silk, meant to smother. After the call, I sat for a long while staring at Eleanor's photo on the mantel. She'd warned me once, people don't show you who they are until they think you can't afford to say no. I poured myself a bourbon and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote one word in all caps. Test. That night, the decision solidified. I'd stay quiet about the fortune. I'd go along with every insult, every soft jab about adjusting to higher standards. I'd nod, smile, play the humble widower. And when the time came when the truth was ready to be seen, I'd reveal just how expensive their arrogance really was. But fate, it seems, never waits for our timing. Because the next morning, I received a letter from the estate lawyer handling Eleanor's trust. Someone had requested access to the Bennett and Holloway Holdings portfolio using my son's name. At first, I thought I'd misread it. The letter, printed on thick cream paper, bore the logo of Foster and Darnell Legal Associates, the same firm Eleanor had used to structure her trust. Dear Mr. Caldwell, this is to inform you that a request for limited access to the Bennett and Holloway Holdings file was made by a third party identifying themselves as your legal proxy, Dr. Caleb Caldwell. The request has not been processed pending your verbal or written authorization. Kindly contact our office at your earliest convenience to confirm the legitimacy of this inquiry. Sincerely, Margaret Darnell, Esquire, Caleb. My son. I read the letter 3 times. My stomach tightened in that slow, sinking way that feels like betrayal wearing polite clothes. I picked up the phone immediately. Foster and Darnell Legal. This is Amanda speaking. Yes, this is Henry Caldwell. I just received a notice about an access request on my late wife's holdings by someone claiming to be my son. Ah yes, Mr. Caldwell. One moment, please. The hold music was some light jazz tune that mocked me with its calm. Finally, a woman's voice came on, smooth, precise, used to dealing with clients who measured worth in decimal places. Mr. Caldwell, this is Margaret Darnell. Thank you for calling. Before we proceed, can you verify the last 4 digits of your security passcode? I gave it to her, and she continued. Yes, Dr. Caldwell's name appeared on a digital access request form. However, the signature didn't match the one we have on file from your family records. We flagged it immediately. Did he call? I asked. No. The form came through a third party, someone named Victoria Lang, claiming to be a paralegal from his office. We contacted the number listed, but it was disconnected within hours. Victoria Lang, I repeated quietly. Did she leave an email? Yes, but it bounced back when we replied, likely a burner account. The room felt colder. Thank you, Miss Darnell. Please freeze all access requests unless they come from me directly. No exceptions. Of course, but Mr. Caldwell, if I may ask, is your son aware of the trust? I hesitated. Not yet. Then I suggest keeping it that way, at least until you determine who's using his name. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. My pulse was the only thing out of rhythm. There were 2 possibilities. Either Caleb was getting reckless, desperate for financial footing before the wedding, or someone was digging around his life to find out what his family was worth. And there was only one circle of people who'd benefit from that kind of knowledge. The Cranes. That night I called Eddie. I need a favor, I said. You still know that guy in cyber forensics? The one who helped us track the internal leak back in 2012? Jared? Yeah, why? I've got an email I need traced. quietly. Sure, Hank. Send it over. But what are we looking for? Whoever's pretending to be my son. Jared got back to me the next day. You were right to check, he said. The request originated from a private IP in Georgetown. The network's registered to Crane Holdings. My fingers tightened around the phone. You sure? As sure as I'm talking to you, somebody at the Crane offices used a fake name and burner email to pose as your son. This wasn't random. It was targeted. I thanked him and hung up, my mind spinning. The Cranes weren't just arrogant, they were probing, testing my financial history, hunting for leverage. But why? That weekend, I went to dinner at Caleb's condo in Baltimore. He'd invited me to talk wedding plans. I showed up early on purpose. Isabella answered the door. Mr. Caldwell, she said, smiling too wide. You're early. Traffic was light, I said. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Caleb on the phone in his office, pacing. His laptop was open, multiple financial spreadsheets glowing on the screen. Isabella stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. Her perfume filled the doorway, sharp, citrusy, calculated. Wine? She asked. Just water, thanks. She handed me a glass and watched me drink it, her expression pleasant but assessing. I'm glad you're here. Caleb's been under a lot of pressure with the wedding and work. My parents just want everything to be perfect. Perfection's expensive, I said. She laughed softly. You sound like my father. Maybe that's not a compliment. For a brief second, her eyes flashed something cold, irritated, and gone before I could name it. Excuse me, she said. I'll check on dinner. As soon as she disappeared into the kitchen, I glanced toward Caleb's office. The door was half closed. His voice drifted out. No, Richard, I told you I'd talk to him. He doesn't know about it yet, and I don't want him suspicious. Silence. Then, yes, I'll handle it before the wedding. I stood frozen in the hallway, the sound of my heart beat louder than the city traffic outside. Richard, as in Richard Crane, the man who'd tested my handshake like he was measuring my value. I left the condo that night before dinner was served, telling Caleb I wasn't feeling well. On the drive home, the city lights blurred through the windshield. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the possibility that my son was in on it, or that he was being used as a pawn in someone else's game. But either way, I was done playing defense. Eleanor had left me wealth, yes, but now it was time to use it, as she truly intended not just to test people, but to expose them. And if the Cranes wanted to dig into my finances, I'd give them something to find. I didn't tell anyone what I'd heard at Caleb's condo. Instead, I spent the next 3 days pretending to be the same quiet, unthreatening man the Cranes believed I was. Then, I made my first move. Monday morning, I called my lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, a sharp, discreet man who'd helped me manage my retirement paperwork years ago. Jonathan, I said, I need to set up a shell company, small, legitimate-looking, easy to verify. Call it Harbor Light Acquisitions. I want it to appear as though it's interested in luxury real estate portfolios across the East Coast. Jonathan hesitated. You're thinking about getting back into business? Something like that, I said. But this time, the business isn't about money, it's about discovery. Within 48 hours, Harbor Light Acquisitions existed registered in Delaware, complete with a professional website, phone number, and fake management team. I funneled $2 million from Eleanor's trust into it to make it look legitimate. Next, I instructed Jonathan to reach out to Crane Holdings through a third-party investment broker. The proposal was simple. Harbor Light wanted to partner on a new luxury property development, something exclusive, high margin, the kind of opportunity that made men like Richard Crane salivate. By Thursday, Richard himself had agreed to a meeting. He arrived at the restaurant wearing confidence like a cologne. Mr. Cole, was it? He said, shaking Jonathan's hand. He didn't recognize me at first. I'd told Jonathan to meet at a different location and introduce myself as Harbor Light's private consultant. When Richard finally looked at me, I watched the flicker of confusion cross his face. Mr. Caldwell, he said, forcing a polite smile. I didn't expect to see me here, I said evenly. Yes, I imagine not. But my firm is very interested in partnering with Crane Holdings. And since you're about to be family, I thought it best to make introductions personally. For the next hour, Jonathan presented a fictional proposal. Harbor Light's interest in Crane Holdings' real estate division, the potential for joint investments, and possible asset acquisitions. Richard's skepticism melted into calculation. "You're full of surprises, Henry," he said, finally swirling his wine. "I didn't realize you were still active in the investment world. Let's just say retirement got boring." He smiled thinly. "Well, perhaps we can find ways to collaborate. Our firm is always open to new capital partners." Capital partners. He didn't see me as family. I was just another wallet to exploit. But that's exactly what I wanted. As we left the restaurant, Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'll have my finance director reach out to your office. Perhaps we can formalize something before the wedding." "I look forward to it," I said. When I got home, I opened a secure email Jonathan had sent during the meeting. Attached were financial reports from Crane Holdings' publicly available records, along with something extra Jared had dug up from old filings. 3 years earlier, Crane Holdings had been investigated for insider trading. The inquiry was dropped before it reached federal prosecution, but several irregularities had been noted in their real estate trust transfers. The investigator who had handled the case, Special Agent Daniel Harrow, now retired, but still living in Maryland. I called Eddie again. "You still have that connection at the SEC office?" "Maybe," he said. "Why?" "Because I think the Cranes have been stealing from more than just taxpayers, and I intend to find out exactly how deep that rot goes." By Friday, I had the outline of a plan. Expose the Cranes, protect Caleb, and make sure no one touched Eleanor's legacy. That weekend, the engagement party took place at the Cranes' estate, an opulent garden affair with a guest list that looked more like a senator's fundraiser than a family celebration. I arrived in my best Navy suit, uninvited confidence in my pocket, and a voice recorder tucked in my jacket. Marianne greeted me with her trademark practice warmth. "Henry, you look wonderful. Isn't this lovely?" "It's something," I said. As I wandered the marble courtyard, I noticed small groups whispering in corners, business partners, lobbyists, board members. Everyone had something to gain from being near the Cranes. Everyone except me. Then I saw Isabella, standing near the terrace, laughing too loudly with a man I didn't recognize, tall, polished, maybe mid-30s. Their conversation was close, intimate. When she noticed me watching, she froze for a split second before flashing that perfect social smile. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, gliding over. "Enjoying the evening?" "I was," I said. "Who's your friend?" "Oh, just an old classmate from Wharton," she said too quickly. "Networking, you know how it is." "Do I?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You have a sharp way of looking at people, Mr. Caldwell. Makes me wonder what you see." "I see patterns," I said. "And lately I've noticed something interesting about yours." "Is that so?" "Yes. Every time money enters the conversation, your tone changes lighter, friendlier, but emptier." For a brief moment, her mask slipped, and what stared back at me wasn't charm, but calculation. "You should be careful, Mr. Caldwell," she said softly. "Some people don't appreciate being analyzed." "Neither do I," I replied, "especially when they're using my son's name to commit fraud." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Then, from behind her, Richard Crane appeared, smiling, controlled. "Everything all right here?" "Perfectly," she said, slipping her hand through his arm. Richard's gaze lingered on me, amused. Always good to see family mixing business and pleasure. He walked away before I could respond, leaving behind a silence that hummed with quiet threat. I knew then the Cranes weren't just snobs. They were dangerous. And the game had only just begun. That night, I drove home with the top button of my shirt undone, and my thoughts clawing at one another. Isabella's face, that flicker of panic when I mentioned fraud, told me I'd finally hit something real. I called Jared as soon as I got in. "I need you to dig deeper into Crane Holdings. Not the public filings, the private communications, emails, servers, anything you can find that touches Bennett and Halloway Holdings." He hesitated. "That's a big ask, Hank. You're talking corporate espionage territory." "Then let's call it justice," I said. By the next morning, Jared had something. "Okay," he said, voice low, almost excited. "You were right. 3 months ago, Crane Holdings tried to open an offshore investment account in Zurich under a name that matches one of Eleanor's old shell companies." I froze. "You're saying they tried to steal her assets?" "Not exactly. Looks like someone inside their firm accessed records tied to that trust and tried to attach it to a dummy corporation. If they'd succeeded, they could have siphoned millions without you ever knowing." My stomach sank. Who approved the transfer? The request came from Richard's personal assistant, Jared said. But the signature looks digital forged. Guess who the routing contact was? I said nothing. Caldwell. It felt like being punched in the chest. Check again, I said quietly. You must be mistaken. No mistake. His name's all over the metadata. Now whether he knew or not, that's another question. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Eleanor had hidden that money to protect her family's integrity. And now that family was being used as bait, I wasn't going to let it happen again. That afternoon, I paid a visit to Special Agent Daniel Harrow, the retired investigator who'd once handled the Crane case. His house sat on a quiet street in Bethesda, the kind of place where the neighbors mow their lawns twice a week. He opened the door, a tall, grizzled man with the wary look of someone who'd seen too many lies disguised as paperwork. Mr. Caldwell, he said, recognizing my name after I introduced myself. Come in. We talked for an hour over black coffee. When I mentioned Crane Holdings, his expression darkened. I remember them, he said. They walked free because the evidence was buried before it reached the U.S. Attorney's office. Someone upstairs pulled strings. The Cranes have friends in high places. Would you help me prove they're still laundering money? I asked. He studied me for a long time. You're not law enforcement, and I'm retired. But I hate unfinished business. He leaned back. What's your play? I want to expose them legally, publicly, and thoroughly. But first, I need to make sure my son isn't part of this. Harrow nodded. Then we start with the wire transfer trail. I'll see what favors I can call in. That night, for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving with purpose instead of anger. Over the next week, Harrow worked quietly behind the scenes, sending me encrypted updates. By Thursday, he had what we needed. A pattern of falsified transfers connecting Crane Holdings to offshore accounts under Bennett and Holloway Holdings. Your wife's trust is the key, he said over the phone. They're trying to merge her assets into their shell network. It's sophisticated, but sloppy at the edges. If we act now, we can stop it, but you'll need to play along a bit longer. Play along? How? Let them think you're buying into their partnership. Let them show you their hand. That opportunity came sooner than I expected. Friday morning, I received a call from an unknown number. Mr. Caldwell, the voice said, calm, practiced, polite. This is Richard Crane. I wanted to apologize for any misunderstandings during the engagement party. I'd like to invite you to my office Monday morning, strictly business. I think there's an opportunity for us both. An opportunity? I asked. Yes, he said. Something that could benefit your son's future quite significantly. I could hear the smirk in his voice. I accepted the meeting. When Monday came, I dressed carefully, dark suit, no tie, calm expression. The Crane headquarters in downtown D.C. looked like a temple of marble and glass. Richard met me in his office, which smelled of leather, power, and arrogance. On the table sat a folder marked Harborlight Partnership Proposal. I did my homework on you, Henry, he said. You're a quiet man, but not simple. You know how to spot value. I try, I said. He opened the folder and slid a set of documents toward me. This agreement would merge a portion of your firm's capital with ours, mutual investment, high yield, minimal oversight, all above board, of course. The numbers looked legitimate, but buried in the fine print was a clause transferring auxiliary asset management to Crane Holdings under an international subsidiary. In plain English, that clause would have given them partial control of Eleanor's trust. I smiled. That's generous of you, Richard. Tell me what made you think I'd trust you with my late wife's estate. For the first time, his polished composure faltered. I'm sorry. Oh, come on, I said softly, leaning forward. You're good at this, the charm, the subtle coercion. But your assistant wasn't careful enough when she forged my son's authorization. His eyes hardened. I think you're mistaken. Am I? I reached into my briefcase and placed a small digital recorder on the desk. A red light blinked once before I pressed play. Richard's voice filled the air, clear as day. No, Richard, I told you I'd talk to him. He doesn't know about it yet, and I don't want him suspicious. The color drained from his face. Funny thing, I said. Walls in condos are thin, and I record things for work. Old habits. He stood, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. You don't know who you're dealing with, Mr. Caldwell. I think I do, I said, standing to. A man who mistook my silence for weakness. He leaned forward. If you go public with this, you'll destroy your son's career. He's tied to my family now. Not yet, I said. And not for long. I turned and walked out, leaving him frozen behind his desk, a king watching his castle begin to crack. But I wasn't done yet. Not until I saw just how deep his rot went, and who else was feeding on it. I didn't sleep that night. Not a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eleanor's handwriting on those trust papers, her elegant, looping script that once wrote love letters and grocery lists in the same graceful hand. She had built her fortune quietly, ethically. Now her name was being dragged through digital mud by a man who smiled at me across a dinner table like he owned my family. When dawn came, I had a plan. If the Cranes wanted to play a game of power, I'd make sure they were the ones under the spotlight, not me, not Caleb, and certainly not Eleanor's memory. The first step was information warfare. I contacted Harrow and Jared. It's time, I said. Leak everything you've got, but not to the press. Not yet. Send it to the IRS Criminal Division, SEC, and the Maryland Financial Crimes Bureau. No anonymous drops. I'll sign the cover letter myself. You sure about that? Jared asked. They'll trace it straight back to you. I want them to. Within 48 hours, the agencies acknowledged receipt. That was enough to start the quiet hum of investigation subpoenas whispered into existence. Accounts flagged for audit, conversations recorded. Meanwhile, I reached out to someone else. Victoria Crane, Isabella's mother. The quieter half of the Crane marriage. I asked to meet her for tea at a neutral cafe in Georgetown. When she arrived, she looked exactly like the kind of woman who could host charity galas while hiding bruises from a loveless life. Mr. Caldwell, she said politely, folding her Hermes scarf as she Saturday. To what do I owe the pleasure? Let's skip the pleasantries, I said. You know your husband's in trouble. Her eyes flicked up, but she didn't flinch. Richard always has complicated business dealings. Trouble is a relative term. Relative or not, this time it's federal. I slid a folder across the table, copies of the same documents Harrow had traced. Money laundering, fraud, attempted asset, misappropriation, all tied to your family's company, and by next week, law enforcement will know it too. Victoria didn't touch the folder. Why show me this? Because your daughter's name is about to be dragged through headlines, I said, and my son's career will burn with hers if we don't move first. For the first time, something human cracked through her polished exterior. You think I'd let Richard destroy my daughter's life? I think you already know he's capable of it. She stared at the documents, the color draining from her face. What do you want from me? Information. You've lived with him long enough to know where the real accounts are hidden. Offshore. Shell companies. Everything. She hesitated, then whispered, If I give you that, what happens to my family? Justice, I said simply, the kind that stops before the collateral damage spreads. That night, she sent me an encrypted email through a private server, the access codes to 3 Swiss accounts under Crane Global Partners Limited. They matched the offshore network Harrow had found. I forwarded everything to the agents, already reviewing the evidence. By morning, Richard Crane's empire had quietly begun to collapse from the inside. But even as I watched the dominoes fall, I couldn't stop thinking about Caleb. He still hadn't called, still hadn't asked why I'd walked out of the engagement party weeks ago. Maybe he'd heard whispers. Maybe he'd chosen denial. Either way, it was time he knew the truth. I drove to Baltimore that evening. His condo lights were off, but I knew his scheduled hospital rotation till 8 p.m. I waited in the parking garage. When he arrived, he froze. Dad, what are you doing here? Getting answers, I said. We went upstairs in silence. The place smelled of expensive soap and exhaustion. I turned to him. Caleb, did you know someone used your name to access your mother's trust? His expression flickered between confusion and guilt. What? No, of course not. Why would I interrupted. Then explain this. I handed him the printout Jared had given me, the authorization form with his digital signature. His face went pale. Dad, I didn't do this. I swear. I want to believe you, I said. But tell me this. Were you aware Richard was trying to merge my accounts into his holdings? Caleb sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. He said it was a partnership deal, for the future. He told me it was to stabilize our family's finances before the wedding. Did you read the fine print? I trusted him, he whispered. I thought he was helping. I let the silence sit there, heavy, suffocating, honest. Finally, I said, he wasn't helping, son. He was using you. Caleb looked up, eyes red. What are you going to do? What I should have done months ago. End this. Before I left, he caught my arm. Dad, does Mom's money even matter anymore? After all this? I looked at him, the boy who once helped me fix leaky faucets, now a man drowning in a different kind of leak. It's not about the money, I said. It's about remembering that decency can't be bought or faked. That's what your mother wanted us to protect. The next morning, headlines began to bloom like wildfire. Federal investigation targets Crane Holdings in multi-million-dollar fraud case. Leaked evidence ties family to offshore accounts and forged financial records. By noon, every business network was broadcasting Richard Crane's fall from grace. That afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number. When I answered, a voice hissed, "You think you've won, Caldwell? You think this is over? You've just declared war." It was Richard. And the way he said war calm, almost amused, chilled me more than anger ever could. The call from Richard Crane ended, but the silence that followed was worse than any threat. It felt like the pause between lightning and thunder, the moment you know destruction is coming but can't tell from where. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the phone long after he hung up. There was a time when men like Richard didn't scare me, but those were simpler years, before influence could be bought with a phone call and a favor owed. That night, I slept with a gun in my desk drawer. By morning, the news cycle had grown teeth. Every major outlet was dissecting the Crane scandal, each headline sharper than the last. Insider corruption at Crane Holdings, multi-million-dollar shell game unraveled. High society heirloom. How generational greed built a house of lies. But as satisfying as the headlines were, they came with collateral damage. Caleb's name. He wasn't charged, but the association alone was enough for the hospital board to suspend him pending review. When I called him, he didn't sound angry. He sounded broken. They think I was part of it, Dad. The hospital's calling it a temporary leave. My colleagues won't even look at me. You'll clear your name, I said. Once the investigation shows how the Cranes forged your signature, they'll... He cut me off. You don't understand. The media isn't waiting for truth. They're already writing my story. I drove to Baltimore again. His apartment was dark, curtains drawn, the air heavy with shame and stale coffee. When he opened the door, I barely recognized him unshaven, eyes red from sleepless nights. I'm sorry, he whispered before I could speak. You warned me, and I didn't listen. I put a hand on his shoulder. You trusted the wrong people. That doesn't make you guilty. He nodded numbly. The hospital wants a formal statement. I can't lie, Dad. If I tell them everything I know, Richard will destroy me. No, I said. He won't, not this time. Because I had one last card to play, and I'd been saving it for when the stakes became personal. I went to see Victoria again. She looked even thinner now, her confidence chipped away by scandal. It's falling apart, she whispered. The SEC froze our domestic accounts. Richard's panicking. Good, I said. That means he's cornered. I need you to help me end it. She hesitated. You don't know what he's capable of, Mr. Caldwell. I do, I said quietly. But you know where his evidence is. She looked around nervously, as if the marble walls of her Georgetown townhouse might be listening. He keeps backups, encrypted drives in the vault under his office. But you'd need access credentials and biometric verification. I smiled grimly. Lucky for us, technology leaves fingerprints and arrogance leaves opportunity. That night, with Jared's help and Harrow's old badge still lending weight, we entered the Crane Holdings building under the pretense of legal audit access. The security guard, likely under instruction not to interfere with anything federal, waved us through. Inside the vault, Jared hooked into the biometric terminal. Give me 30 seconds, he muttered, his fingers a blur over the keyboard. When the lock clicked open, we stepped into the cold glow of steel shelves lined with drives, documents, and files labeled Project Meridian, Aurora, Lattice. We took everything. By dawn, the evidence sat in an encrypted cloud folder ready to drop to every investigative agency in D.C. That afternoon, federal agents raided Crane Holdings headquarters. Cameras caught the moment Richard Crane was led out in handcuffs, expression blank, jaw tight. Behind him, Isabella clutched her mother's arm, mascara running, a tragic heiress undone by her own ambition. By evening, the world knew. Richard Crane arrested on federal fraud and conspiracy charges. Whistleblower identified as Henry Caldwell, retired engineer. The calls started soon after reporters, lawyers, opportunists. I ignored them all. Then Caleb called. His voice trembled. They cleared me, Dad. The hospital reinstated me. Good, I said. But there's something else, Isabella. She came by. I froze. What did she want? He hesitated. To apologize. She said she didn't know what her father was doing, that she tried to stop him once, but he threatened her. She's moving away, California. Do you believe her? He sighed. I don't know. Part of me still loves her. Another part can't forget how she looked at you that night like you didn't belong. You've learned something most men take decades to understand, I said. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's dependency in a prettier dress. He laughed softly, the first real laugh I'd heard in months. By the end of the week, I received a certified letter from the Department of Justice. My evidence had not only cleared Caleb, but also led to the recovery of nearly $312 million in laundered assets spread across multiple states and countries. The lead investigator's note was short. Without your cooperation, this case would have taken years. The country owes you, Mr. Caldwell. I folded the letter, placed it in Eleanor's old jewelry box, and sat for a long while in the quiet. The Cranes' empire had crumbled. Caleb was rebuilding his reputation. And for the first time since Eleanor's death, I felt peace. But peace has a way of testing itself. Because 2 days later, I received another envelope unmarked, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of my house, taken from across the street. On the back, in neat, elegant handwriting, were 4 words. We always rebuild, Henry. I stared at the photograph for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. It wasn't the image itself that unsettled me, it was the precision. The photo had been taken at twilight, the golden hour when the sun turns every surface to copper. Whoever took it knew exactly when to capture my house, looking most vulnerable. I flipped it again. The words were written in fountain pen, the ink dark and deliberate. We always rebuild, Henry. That wasn't Richard Crane's handwriting. His was jagged, hurried the scrawl of a man too used to signing checks and closing deals. This writing was elegant, feminine. My stomach turned. I drove to Caleb's apartment that evening, the photo still in my coat pocket. He was home, reading through medical journals, trying to claw his way back to normal. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said when I walked in. I handed him the photograph. It was left in my mailbox this morning. He studied it. You think it's from Richard? I shook my head. No, he's in federal custody. Someone else sent this. Someone with his same obsession for control. He frowned. Isabella? The question hung in the air. He didn't want to believe it. Neither did I. But we both knew she had the access, the resources, and the motive. 2 days later, my suspicions hardened into truth. Agent Harrow called me from a restricted number. Henry, you should sit down for this. I'm already sitting. He took a breath. We processed the offshore account records you gave us. There's a secondary login pattern that doesn't match Richard Crane's credentials. It matches his daughter's. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you telling me Isabella was part of this? Looks that way, Harrow said. She wasn't a passive bystander. We think she helped design the cover network, the shell accounts in Zurich and Panama. Richard may have been the face, but she built the machinery. And now that her father's behind bars, she's cleaning up. Cleaning up how? Selling off assets under alias names, rebranding smaller holdings, moving money through proxies. She's trying to rebuild a new Crane empire without the Crane name. I rubbed my temples. Can we stop her? We're trying, but she's smart, smarter than her father ever was, and more ruthless. That night, I sat alone in my study, the shadows stretching long across the floor. The storm outside rattled the windows like a warning. When the doorbell rang, I froze. Through the peephole, I saw a figure standing in the rain. A woman tall, wearing a beige trench coat. She didn't move, didn't knock again, just waited. I opened the door. Hello, Mr. Caldwell, she said softly. Rain dripped from her hair. I'm not here to threaten you. Isabella, I said, you shouldn't be here. I know, she whispered, but I needed you to hear it from me. About what? My father didn't start the fraud, she said, her voice trembling but steady. I did. The words landed like glass breaking inside my chest. I built the accounts, the network, everything. He just took it further than I ever intended. I wanted to create something secure, something untouchable after my mother's first bankruptcy scare years ago. But he saw a way to exploit it. And when you exposed him, I lost everything. You didn't lose everything, I said quietly. You lost your mask. She smiled faintly. You sound like him. I'm nothing like him. No, she said. You're worse because you still believe in honor. That makes you dangerous in our world. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating her pale face, the rain glistening on her lashes like tears. Why the photograph? I asked. Why the message? She looked down. Because you can't destroy what you don't fully understand. My father built the illusion. I built the infrastructure. The systems are still alive, scattered. You stopped one branch, not the root. I stepped closer. Then I'll find the root. You won't, she said softly. You're too late. Before I could answer, headlights flared through the rain. A black SUV idled at the curb. She turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, she said, Caleb really did love me. And I loved him too, just not enough to give up power. Then she was gone. The next morning, Harrow called again. Henry, we found her flight logs. She left D.C. last night. Private jet. Destination classified under diplomatic clearance. She's gone. Gone where? Probably Dubai or Singapore. Somewhere our warrants don't reach. For a moment, I felt fury. Sharp, righteous fury. But beneath it, something colder settled in. Resignation. Eleanor once told me that evil isn't born in darkness, it's born in justification. People convince themselves they're doing the right thing, one compromise at a time, until the line between necessity and greed vanishes. The Cranes had crossed that line long before I ever met them. But Isabella, she had been the architect. That night, Caleb came over. We sat on the porch, listening to the crickets and the soft rumble of distant thunder. She's gone, I said simply. He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. Part of me wishes she hadn't been. I know. Dad, did I do the right thing by helping expose her family? I looked at him, really looked at him. My son, weary but wiser, scarred but standing tall. You did the only thing a decent man can do, I said. You told the truth. He nodded slowly. And what now? Now, I said, we rebuild not the way they do. Not with money or power, with purpose. The next morning, I made the final call Eleanor would have wanted me to make. I officially established the Eleanor Caldwell Foundation for Ethical Medicine, a scholarship fund for young doctors committed to serving low-income communities. Caleb became its first chair. Months passed. The world moved on from the Crane scandal. The headlines faded. But every so often, I'd catch a flicker of a familiar name buried deep in financial bulletins, a shell company rebranded, an investment fund launched quietly offshore. Somewhere out there, Isabella Crane was rebuilding. And somewhere inside me, a quiet truth had taken root. Justice isn't always the end. Sometimes, it's just the opening act of the next reckoning.